settled and all stakeholders have read and reread the fine print of the cabinet approval to the changes in foreign direct investment in India's construction industry. The right time is now to ask the big question. Will easier FDI norms in construction create a housing bubble, or will they meet the government's objective of creating more affordable housing? Which way are the odds stacked? Let's thrash that precise question with our panel today. Gitambar Anand, CMD, ATS Infrastructure Limited and President-elect Credai National. David Walker, Managing Director, Sari Homes. Ajit Krishnan, Partner and Leader, Real Estate Practice, EY. Sameer Jasuja, CEO and Founder, Prop Equity. Also joining us from the Mumbai studio, PS Jayakumar, MD, VBHC. From Bangalore, Joe Verghese, Managing Director, Colliers International. And from Pune, Lalit Kumar Jain, CMD, Kumar Urban Development Limited and Chairman, Credai. The fact that we have people from across the country joining us today, developers and of course other stakeholders, means that there is a lot of excitement at least around this decision. Now, 100% FDI in township and housing and construction was approved in 2005, but under certain conditions. Now, these conditions have been made easier. A, the minimum built-up area requirement has been reduced to less than half. The capital which the foreign investors need to bring into the country for housing and construction has also been halved. And C, exit norms have been made easier. Government's intentions are very, very simple: to boost fund flow into the cash-starved industry, to enable the creation of more affordable housing and stem the proliferation of slums and, of course, also around cities. The first question, Gitambar Anand, tell me, norms made easier, FDI should come in. That's what everybody is assuming. So I'm going to take step by step. Minimum FDI requirement reduced to 5 million from 10 million. So this is an absolutely plus point for the industry.
That's very, very right, Manisha. Not this. You know, the biggest thing is that the minimum area requirement has been reduced from 50,000 square meters to 20,000 square meters. More so for projects which have at least 30% of affordable housing defined by government. There is no minimum area requirement. So this is a great step forward. And, you know, the entire host of opportunities now available to the FDI partners are unthinkable, unimaginable, and this is where they should really come in aggressively and invest in this country, in the story, in the growth story of India. Having said that, what needs to be, there is a lot of excitement in the market, and we can't thank the new government enough for getting in these changes, because had these been done earlier, maybe 5 years ago, we would have been in a different place today. But having said that, again, let me again thank the government on behalf of all of us here for having done what they have done.
Okay. I think Mr. Anand has been too nice to the government. David Walker, you have to tell me that this is too small a beginning, or the article that I read you wrote after the FDI norms were eased out said, hey, look at India's ranking in ease of doing business. So this is just a tiny, tiny step towards actually getting FDI in, isn't it?
Well, I think the first thing is it's a step in the right direction, and we should always welcome and congratulate that. And I believe FDI is very good for the country. So anything that's easing up norms in that respect is welcomed. But if you consider, you know, the requirements of India in terms of its infrastructure and its development needs, there's figures of about $1 trillion of investment required in the next 5 years. I think reducing an FDI requirement from 10 million to 5 million is not fundamentally going to change that. There are other things with the reduction in the area and making exits easier, which we welcome. But I think there is much bigger challenges that are facing. And yes, I've talked about the ease of doing business. And I guess that report is a little bit out of date, so it doesn't really reflect the current government's performance. But questions about enforceability of contracts and getting permissions rank, you know, really lowly in world ratings, around about 180 out of 190 countries in the world. Okay. So I think these are areas which are often rated on this show, but I think they're really important that they also start to be addressed as priorities moving forward.
All right. Okay. So it's a welcome decision. Now, Lalit Kumar Jain, let's take point by point on all the arguments that I've been hearing. The first argument that I've heard is that it will ease the cash-strapped industry, the cash flows. The FDI will also result in trimming of debt of several listed companies. How true is that?
I think we should be very careful when we say that this is going to make a big difference, because what changes have been made is going to benefit prime city projects, smaller ones, and larger projects in smaller towns. So what we see here is definitely increased inflows through FDI in smaller projects. However, let us not expect it to be a game changer unless, like David said, that we need mega steps in improving our ease of doing business. One more aspect which is missed out, or it may be corrected in near future, is the commencement of investment or commencement of date of operation is defined as the first within 6 months of first plan approval.
Right.
I think this may be a roadblock, because this can actually see reduction of investment instead of increment of investment. So I suppose this is a mistake, and it may be soon corrected, because currently we see FDI coming in at various point of time, and previous definition was commencement of business. Now it is commencement of project, so it will be a big dampener according to me.
Okay.
And it will not only affect the smaller investment which is envisaged, but larger investment also.
Okay. Ajit Krishnan, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you. You know, why is everyone so excited? Stock markets gave a thumbs up and all the listed companies went up. The stocks reacted extremely positively when the fine print says that, okay, the money has to come within 6 months of commencement of the project, as Lalitji just pointed out. So pretty much it is for new projects, for existing approved.
6 months of approval of plan, within 6 months of plan approval.
All right, so then where will the money come? I think that's the big question. So investors, I also read another argument which is completely puzzled me, is that investors or buyers who've already bought into projects which are delayed for several years, will now have a way out because FDI will come in and help out all those cash-strapped investors. Is that correct, or that just sounds too far-fetched?
No, I think we need to really break this down into two different parts. Let me address the point of 6 months of commencement of or getting the final approval. I think the larger issue, which is what most people advocated for, was that historically there was a view that had been propagated for many years that if an FDI has to come, it has to come at a greenfield stage, which means just land and nothing beyond that. So any project which goes through a life cycle of 3, 5, 7 years, typically the large question was, can the same investor put more money after the 5th year? Because now the land is not land, it's got a semi-constructed building. Similarly, if there was a project which was half complete, it was probably going into CDR and you needed a new investor to walk in and take on, then that capital could not be accessed because this was no longer a greenfield project. What they've landed up doing is now they've added that definition to that definition that FDI can come in up to 10 years or completion of project, whichever is earlier. In some sense, they just expanded the sphere of greenfield to that extent. I think the second point that's been really made is the exit opportunity. The previous policy of 2000, 2001, 2005 never prescribed an exit mechanism. The moot exit mechanism in 2005, which was assumed, was completion of project. But what this has now done is defined that completion of project as provision of basic trunk infrastructure. So to that extent, I think a lot of positive feed saying that at least there is a clear path to exit and there is now a lot more clarity on what constitutes greenfield.
Okay. Mr. Jayakumar, what's your opinion? What happens? I mean, if it's really going to ease fund flow, but to whom is the big question? FDI, will it actually ease out the liquidity crisis which is being faced by listed companies? We'll come to the affordable housing question much later because that's a whole other gamut that we have to, of course, slug out with you.
No, I would go with what Lalita said, which is that the provisions seem to suggest that existing projects cannot get financing, or so it seems. And in general, if you want to get immediate investment, you need to make sure that the existing projects get funded, they get completed. To that extent that, I mean, unless there is some other clarification, that seems to be the limitation.
Okay. Joe Verghese, your opinion on where will the monies come in?
In my opinion, we should just look at these steps as steps in the right direction, as David just pointed out. In my opinion, this is not going to open up the floodgates of funds coming into the market. I think we have some time to go before that. The investors are going to be watching and seeing that, their bigger risk, which is exchange rate risk as well as execution risk, which stands out in the market, which to a great extent is caused by delays in approvals and permissions that need to be got. All those, how is the government looking at addressing that? I think it gives a very positive signal to investors that this government is really interested in getting foreign funds investing in this market, and they'll be watching to see what next they do to make it much more investor friendly.
Okay, so we've busted the first myth that the monies, or at least debt-laden companies who have been dealing projects, they are not going to find an immediate cash infusion into those businesses. Okay, let's look at the second one, and I'm going to toss it over to Samir for his opinion and analysis. The reduction of minimum requirements for built areas and capital will now allow investment to flow into South Mumbai or Central Delhi. This will also encourage the development of smaller projects, especially in urban areas where the availability of land is limited. Samir, how true is that?
I would agree with you there that, private equity money, a large part of it has still been coming in as structured debt. Because the projects were of much larger sizes, the execution risks were much more. With this new rule coming out of 20,000 square meters, the execution risk becomes much lower. You can probably see more money coming in form of equity than in form of structured debt, because the risk will come down much below the risk of investing in a project of 50,000 square meters and above, and plus the exits have become much more easier. So I think keeping all these factors in mind, you will definitely see more private equity money coming in, but in smaller towns, you could see more money coming in places like Pune or in Bangalore or in Hyderabad, where the plot sizes are much smaller. But you may not see that happening in a Noida or a Gurgaon, because the minimum size is anyway 11 acres odd. But yes, I completely think that it will open up many more avenues for development in smaller land parcels in urban areas and in smaller tier 2, tier 3 cities as well.
Okay, Gitambar, would you agree? I mean, PE investors, whenever I've had them on the show, say, look, we don't think these markets are ready right now. The demand there, the job creation is good enough for a robust housing demand. So if PEs are not investing, why will FDI or foreign money come into tier 2, tier 3 cities?
See, we have to look at this whole issue in two parts. One is the central government has done their bit by showing the intent to be business friendly and friendly to the foreign investor by making rules which are conducive to investment. The other part is, will money flow in? See, yes and no. Now, as an investor, if I were a foreign investor, I would look at the world rank ratings of ease of doing business in India. That's 142. Sad story. But again, over there, the central government is pushing for a system of a single window clearance. These things take time. They will happen when they happen. The third part of the story is, which everybody's touched on, that is the execution capability of the Indian partner. Now, unless and until the foreign partner, the foreign investor doesn't get comfort about his partner over here, whether he can actually execute and deliver a project, be it 20,000 square meters or 10,000 square meters in affordable or whatever, you won't see money coming in. So from our end, from industry, we have to focus on construction, on execution, and we have to show that, yes, we can do it. Because there's a documented shortage of housing in this country, be it in the space of middle-class housing or affordable housing, there is a shortage.
Okay, sure enough.
So the opportunity exists. The central government has gone ahead and made certain changes in the law so that foreign investors can come in. State governments need to now make the approval process more streamlined. They need to really aggressively think about how...
Okay, Gitambar, am I hearing that the reason why PE funds haven't gone to tier 2 cities is not that there isn't money to be made in housing in tier 2 cities, but because of the approval delays and the complicated approval process? Is that true? Because I'm hearing a very different story.
No. That is true not only for tier 2, tier 3, that is true for tier 1 also. You know, they're so scared of the approval process, they say, they would be happier coming into a project which has sanctions, and that's what we've been experiencing in our dialogue with these foreign partners.
So you're saying that the debate is mute whether it's a large city or a tier 2 city. Right now we have to fix the process, the execution track record, etc. All right. On the execution track record, more FDI. Now this is another interesting aspect which I read, which I totally actually think could be very true. More FDI would also mean that builders would have to adhere to the international norms and will be forced to be more transparent in the way they operate. Ajit Krishnan, that should be true.
Yeah, so I think if you...
But it still hasn't happened. I mean, there has been FDI, but how much of that has led to transparency is a question.
Yeah, so I'm an ever optimist. I think the point is we have to get real, and we have to also try and do it in relative terms. So if you look back in 97, what was the level of transparency this sector in this country had versus 2003 versus 2013. I think there's a lot more clarity, there's a lot more information, there's a lot more blogs, if you may say that. There's just so much more information flowing out there.
Okay.
So just knowledge, I think, has changed dramatically in the last decade. Now, well, I won't say it's purely because of FDI as a character. I think it's just the way the country's moved, the way real estate as a sector has moved, the way there has been an emergence of players, not just in the tier 1 cities. You had, Sare Homes was not a name that you had heard of, right? It's emerged as a great developer. There are a lot more professionals getting into this business across all cities. I think the challenge which Gitambar pointed out on execution clearly remains. It's not just about the developer, but also the entire ecosystem of the construction industry. The second is, I think when you looked at tier 2 and 3 cities, we as a firm are of the view that there is clearly a large opportunity out there. However, you just don't get to lay your hands on an organized player. It's largely fragmented, one-man ownership, not too many organizations, pretty much operating on single projects of small, very small scale, small size. And FDI capital, so it's not FDI, even domestic capital doesn't go into those cities other than for mortgage. So, if you picked up all the banks in India and said, how much of money, equity money, have you actually lent to a tier 2 and 3 city, it will be abysmally low. They would have definitely lent against mortgages, home finance, construction finance. But, if you ask them what is the nature of security they believe, what is the credibility they have of a tier 2 or 3.
I think that will change now, I think.
And that's the
it's evolving.
Point. And FDI capital is nothing but a source of equity. It has to start as a stimulus of equity. And unless it starts as a stimulus of equity, structured finance and all that is for more mature markets, maybe the tier 1 cities which have matured into that. But they also went through a role where they had raised a lot of equity and then they matured into a structured finance product.
Okay, I think, Ajit, you've raised a very interesting point. FDI is equity money, but how expensive or cheap is it going to be? I mean, will it make money more expensive rather than cheaper? Even that's debatable. At what cost will FDI money really come into housing and construction? When we come back, we could look at that. Easing of norms for FDI in construction is expected to do several things. We've outlined those. One, ease the cash crunch that the real estate sector faces today. Also create a lot of affordable housing stock. That's the big thing that the government is hoping to achieve. Now, several reports that have quoted real estate funds have thrown up a very, very interesting matter. They're saying, or these funds posture, that FDI investor is looking at returns of 20% plus. So what if it's equity? He's looking at returns of 20% plus, otherwise he ain't going to bring the monies in. While if you're going to look at just debt, domestic debt is available at 18% pre-tax from NBFCs, etc. Though I'm not very sure which NBFC is lending to real estate at 18%, but that's what one is reading. So, and these are the comments which are coming in from real estate funds. Joe Verghese, what's going on? I mean, this whole thing about it's going to be expensive money, it's going to push up prices more, it's actually going to create housing bubble, because guess what? FDI money is going to be expensive. True or false?
Actually, you have to look at it from a different perspective. I mean, when investors look at what kind of returns they need to make on the investments made in a country like India, they look at many factors and they have to assess risk. So the way to bring down the cost of capital, you would have to start addressing areas of risk. I mean, at the economic level, there's an exchange risk, which is something that will have to be addressed at a different level altogether. But at the industry level, we spoke about execution risk. I want to come back to the point which I made earlier. Approvals. This is actually something that is in the government's hands. If you ease the process of getting approvals, you actually do multiple things. You reduce the execution risk, you reduce the time taken for a project to reach completion, you increase the trust that a customer has on developers who are delayed because of these approval risks, as well as you give more time for people like Mr. Anand and Mr. Jain, who currently spend a lot of their time trying to get approvals, and that time goes into improving execution.
All right, so you're saying, but okay, let's just come back to the number. Joe Verghese, I get that point. I think it's been made over and over again in the debt. My question is, and David, maybe you can step in here, what is the kind of return that an investor would look at from a market like India?
Investors are certainly going to be looking for 20% plus, probably 25% plus from an equity point of view. I think the important thing to recognize is that debt is not necessarily an alternative for equity. You need to have an equity base in place before a debt lender will consider lending to you.
Absolutely.
So, and equity is a higher risk form of capital, so it does need a higher return than debt. But the fundamental is, it's not as if you can just pick between I'm going to have some equity or I'm going to have some debt. You have to have the equity first before you can go and get the debt. So that, I think, explains why there's a pricing difference from what you were talking about earlier.
Lalit Kumar Jain, it's not been easy for real estate developers to negotiate with even PE investors so far in India. They come in with a lot of stringent conditions. Do you think foreign direct investment will flow in easier?
No, not really. See, FDI or any equity adds to the balance sheet because it gives us leverage capability. So in some form, equity will be required, FDI will be required for projects which are ambitious. Definitely FDI helps them. And as I said, FDI is required at various point of time at various stages. And not one FDI remains with you for longer run, because every FDI has time limits. So each FDI has, say, 5 to 7 years of lifespan. And they may invest, after 3 years of their lifespan is over. So we need repeated investment in larger projects at various point of time from different people. Like we do a lot of township project, and we require capital adequacy at later stage when we take the bigger jump. So FDI is required, or any equity form is required, and which gives us strength in balance sheet to leverage more. So I don't think it will slow down. Government has taken the right step, and I think with certain modification, it will enhance investment flow in the country.
Okay. All right. Let me just look at a very interesting report, which is the Valem report, which basically says that there's going to be a bubble which might just get created because of foreign direct investment coming in. There were lots of points. First point that it said is that the reason why it create a housing bubble is that, you keep talking about the demographic dividend of this country and the number of people, young people who will want a house. But it's not the number of young people by itself, but it's a question of how many jobs you create, what kind of income you put into people's hands. Let me come to you, Mr. Jayakumar. What do you think? I mean, this whole aspect, or people are talking about this end game of speculation in real estate. There are also organizations who are saying we're going to file a PIL against this whole easing of norms of FDI. What's going on? Why is this big fear that it will create a housing bubble and push up prices further?
No, I think, at least in the affordable housing space, I think that's completely misinformed view. And as I say, if there are 8 economists, there are 9 opinions. And always somebody will say there will be a bubble, and somebody else will say there is going to be no bubble. But the fact of the matter is very simple. For building the scale of affordable housing we need very large amount of capital. Those numbers have been estimated anything from 20 billion to 1 trillion, depending on whom you speak to. But whatever the number is, it's very large. We need capital. And the only way we can grow is by getting capital. So this is a very welcome policy, but there is always, for any economic policy, there is always going to be some set of people who are going to say this is not a good thing. You see that in retail, opening FDI for retail. You see that in opening of FDI for railways. This is the usual debate we have in an argumentative society.
Okay. So
but as far as the policy measures are concerned, just to kind of touch upon it, is that these have been well thought out. One of the reasons why we spoke about 20,000 square meter from CREDAI was basically bulk of the affordable housing was happening in the second and third tier cities, urban periphery of Bombay, etc., where there wasn't enough scale for a project of the size of 500,000 square foot. That's why we discussed about it. Okay. So I think these changes have been made. It's important we now take advantage of it. And this bubble business is a kind of overplayed fear.
All right. The conditions.
On the other hand,
on the
other hand, you don't have FDI and you don't have affordable housing. Is that what you want to have?
But do you believe in the current conditions, as it's been laid out, that minimum floor area will not apply to projects which commit at least 30% of the total project cost for low-cost affordable housing is a big enough and a good enough step to now bring FDI for affordable housing?
I think that is just one of the parameters. There are a couple of other parameters as well. There is a parameter around 60% of the houses being less than 60 square meter.
Right.
There is another parameter around 35% of the houses being less than 27 square meters. So it's just not one item. It's a multiplicity of items. So there is a focus on affordable housing in that sense. My only argument against all of this is by putting a lot of numbers in, we always leave a little bit of room for subsequent argument, debates, cases, and so on. And I would have preferred a one set of rule rather than multiple definitions. But that said, the policy with respect to affordable housing very clearly makes you focus your energy around affordable housing. Okay. I mean, those projects that don't need the minimum ticket size, minimum floor size.
You have so many opinions from, I was reading the Economic Times the other day, and there was this report from some property consultant saying various things about real estate which are so untrue. And the other day I was on a TV interview, and there's this consultant sitting in Mumbai. He's never been to Noida, believe you me, and he's talking about the infrastructure of Noida being very poor. So I offered him a free ticket from my side to come and see before they write such things and give such opinions on national television.
All right. Okay. So let me just then come down to affordable housing. We've already established that there's not going to be a housing bubble created. FDI is not expensive money. They're not going to put conditions on developers to actually raise the property prices or at least demand unreasonable sort of returns. It's equity. Equity capital does expect higher returns because it has higher risk than debt. Fair enough. Now on affordable housing per se, Jaikumar made a very, very important point, and Geetambar, maybe you would like to comment on it. Yes, I do see that there are three definitions. One is that, okay, you were anyway reserving 15% of every project for LIG housing. Now you've got additional benefits defined by the government, 60% of FAR, FSI, that's 160 square meters. Then there is another definition. Multiplicity of definitions wasn't required?
Well, you see, industry right now needed some direction as to what qualifies as affordable housing. So for the first time, I think this was imperative that the government say something on what they think affordable housing is. RBI has a different definition of affordable housing, and that is what we had requested them to be to make a part of the FDI policy. Their definition should have been made a part of affordable housing policy for the FDI too. But the government in its wisdom has specified certain sizes of housing as affordable, and of course social housing, which is 27 square meters and below. Let us see how it goes, and let me tell you, Manisha, now if I were to do a project, say in Delhi, which is below 20,000 square meters and has no minimal limit, I would be forced to make houses of 60 square meters and 27 square meters. So what is going to happen is that I would make probably in a 27 square meter, I'd make a one-bedroom house, flat apartment, which of course becomes affordable because of the size of the apartment. The square foot price would not change, but the ticket size decreases. So it becomes affordable to many more people, because before this, if I was not taking FDI and I had access to capital, which was more expensive, I probably would not have done this size. Now, if I am taking FDI, I would be forced to do this size, which actually is catering to a section of society who would have a smaller budget. So this is the good part of this Let's see what the government eventually defines affordable housing as, whether it's the RBI definition or is it this definition that we have to finally follow.
All right, I think I need a few more opinions on who's going to step up on the ladder of actually coming out with affordable housing projects. That's a big question because, yes, Gitamber's already raised his hands. I would like to see more hands being raised from the developer community. On our way back, easing of FDI norms, will India get more affordable housing? Will India become slum-free? At least, is that a dream that we can dream of in the next 15 to 20 years? We'll be back in just a moment. With easing of FDI norms, will India become slum-free? Will there be affordable homes for everybody? Because if you look at the figures, and we discussed this last week itself, if you want to afford a middle-class home in any of India's top cities, the cost would be anywhere between 35 to 40 lakhs. And for that, you should be earning at least 18 to 20 lakhs per annum. That's the kind of equation which is. So 20 years of somebody's income just goes into their house. That's the kind of, just the price equation that we are looking at. Ajit Krishnan, so we are back to that big question of affordable housing. A lot of excitement I see amongst the developers. This time they're saying, yes, we're going to step up. We are going to come into the market for affordable housing. How much do you believe is that true?
So just taking on from where Gitamber said, I think if you just take real estate or any apartment cost, what are the 2 or 3 components? There's land, there's license fee, which the government charges, and I can assure you in the last decade, I have seen this sector going from very nominal stamp duty tax to an add-on of VAT, service tax, works contract tax, corporate tax over the years, which seems to have been, at least the way we stand out here, I think we see it, that the last 10 years, the government has single-handedly focused on taxing the sector more in the hope that developers will scale down their profitability. However, the impact was completely the opposite. It was simply a pass-on of this cost to the customers because demand exists, supply is less, which means developers had the ability to just pass on these as cost of property. Now, in order to achieve affordability, tax, the land price, and the construction cost. These are only the 3 elements. And then, of course, the greed, which I'm sure, if you any human developer in this country or in the world, anybody who does business for profit is always going to look for return on capital. So it's not just the FDI guy who's looking for a return on capital of 20% or an IRR of 20-25%. It's anybody who's willing to provide risk capital. So a lender, a bank, or any structured debt provider is not an equity provider. They're lending. Therefore, lending terms are very different from equity terms. So anybody who's providing equity, even me, providing equity through a portfolio management service or anybody else or through a domestic private equity fund is also looking for that kind of return because we believe that's the risk element. So, so when you balance those 2 equations, you'll realize it's a land cost that needs to be seen. And of course, the industry has talked about double the FSI.
All right, let's just assume that the land cost is not going to go down. That's going to be a difficult proposition. But is there then money to be made, Mr. Jaykumar? I mean, if I just heard in the break, Mr. Anand saying that there are a lot of sovereign funds who are looking at that 60 square foot?
Square meter, sorry, 60 square meter area, that provision. That's where the meat is. You see in the pyramid, that's where the actual demand is. So that's a long-term business. For the next 2 decades, you can keep making that a product. So that's where the meat is. And there's not much land left in the cities now.
Okay.
So, you have to
so how do you make your cities slum-free? Is this easing of norms actually going to help that help us achieve that dream?
I would kind of put it this way. There are a bunch of things that needs to be done. But as far as the DIPP is concerned, their lever is on FDI policy, which they have made the right change. Then there are other set of stakeholders who have to contribute. But broadly speaking, in my assessment, a 30% reduction in cost of housing is possible without taking into account change in the land price. It's a combination of approval timeline, which to my mind is the largest cost, because it increases both the cost in terms of time we hold the capital as well as the cost of capital itself on account of the risk, cascading risk. I think the second issue is how well are we going to come through with transportation corridors, because you're not going to, may not find enough land in the inner cities. It's about places that are outside, peri-urban and so on. So the ability to get through with transportation corridor and social and other forms of infrastructure is critical. Now, if you look at the broader policy, the government has defined a concept of 100 smart cities. They have provided for a 70 crore funding for each of the smart cities in this year, and this is for start. So if they continue to keep on this track, I don't see why affordable housing would not be available. Maybe people have to travel an hour and a half, but that you do even if you are working in New Jersey and commuting to New York. So it's not any different. So I'm very, very positive on this whole thing. The Cassandras will always tell you bubble will happen, developers will cheat, something or the other. But there is an opportunity and we should take use of this opportunity. But there are a bunch of things to be done as well.
All right, Sameer Jasuja, you think developers will take that opportunity and actually move away from being in that sweet spot of providing homes which cost between 50 lakhs to a crore, crore and a half, depending on the city you are, and get into affordable housing sector?
Most definitely, I believe that is going to happen because A, there is enough profitability there. The demand-supply mismatch is in favor of more demand and less supply. And thirdly, that the government is initiatives towards affordable housing is going to definitely make the developers very excited about affordable housing. And with FDI now coming in smaller projects, I think it's a win-win for everybody.
Win-win for everybody. I think we're going to wrap out at that point. I think everybody here said it's a fantastic move, no housing bubble. That kind of fear is absolutely unfounded. In fact, all that you have to do is ease out the approval process a little bit more, and you will have housing prices come down and even make affordable housing a great business to be in. You also, of course, have to make it easy for foreign investors to work in India's construction industry, as pointed out by many panelists here. So we'll end on that note, and I'll thank all my panelists here. Gitambar Anand, thank you very much. David Walker, pleasure. Joe Verghese, Ajit Krishnan, Sameer Jasuja, Mr. Jay Kumar, and Mr. Lalit Kumar Jain. Gentlemen, thank you very much for making the time. FDI in India's construction, easing of the norms is a big, big step. Let's just forget of all that else is required. But the first step, and it's coming so soon after the new government in place, is itself something to celebrate. Goodbye and thanks for watching.